Hello everyone, my name's Matt and I'm a Dungeon Master, D&D player, much like all of you. I've spent quite a long time trying to find a good system to keep track of my campaigns. And while I've done it on paper, and in most cases like to do it in paper as my preferred option, it's hard to kind of keep track of the whole world and everything that's going around. I have tried some of the online systems such as World Anvil and some of the others, and I like those systems. I really do. My only big hang up with a lot of those is that I have to pay an online subscription persistently. And that's just hard. If I were doing this 3, 4, multiple times a week, that'd be great. But when I'm playing 1 to 2, maybe 3 times a month, it's kind of hard for me to justify those costs. I've experimented with different online other tools like Excel and some other templates that people have posted online. I finally have kind of come across something that has really caught my eye and really worked out well. And it is actually a piece of novel writing software called Bibisco. Bibisco is an open source novel writing software. You can download a free copy of it. There is a paid version, which is kind of paid where you want to get a little bit more features. But I want to kind of run over it. I've been using it for about 3 weeks, though, now so far. I just want to outline some of the nice features it has that really kind of makes it work well for Dungeons and Dragons or tabletop RPG tracking, and what might need to be improved, and what sort of kind of cool insights it has. Might be a cool tool that some of you might want to check out. So when you launch Bibisco, this is the page you get, and as I mentioned before, it's designed for novel writing. So it will initially kind of give you some information. I have a campaign set up that we're running here, Storm King's Thunder. This is kind of a homebrew version of Storm King's Thunder, but I want to kind of run through the interface and kind of show what it's doing. And what makes it, I think, really nice for D&D tracking. So let's just kind of go ahead and drop through. The first tab it puts you on is this project tab. Next one you can look at is the architecture of your novel. This is kind of nice because it breaks everything down into chunks, which is specifically nice for D&D because you might have multiple narratives. So let me show you a little bit of what we got going on here. Here we have the premise of the novel, or your campaign, which can kind of be in a one-line or one-paragraph sentence of what's going on. Those of you familiar with Storm King's Thunder, the ordning of the giants has been broken, and chaos has spilled across Faerun. That's pretty much it. One cool thing that Bibisco has kind of running across the entire interface is this kind of task list of if you need to fill something in, a to-do, not yet complete, or completed, kind of checkbox for each of the text modules that you input in. It also has this Project Explorer tab, which kind of runs persistent, which allows you to pull up characters or other things in the story for quick reference if you want to pull it in. And you can have descriptions of that. And you'll see how that kind of comes into play a little bit later. The Fabula, I haven't really used this yet. This is kind of, as it prompts you here, narration of events sorted by their logical and chronological sequence. What I think I'm probably going to end up using this for is a kind of a campaign summary of each of the session summaries. The way it's set up right now is it's basically just a single text box. So I'll probably just kind of tab things out, bold each date, and then have a brief summary for each thing in there. Back to the architecture. We have the setting. Again, you can describe what your place setting is. We're playing in Faerun, standard Dungeons & Dragons sort of setup, but you can also add your own custom setting in here. The only kind of trade-off, again, is it is only a single text box. So if you're looking to tab out all sorts of different subcategories in the setting, might not be the place to do that. But there might be ways to do that in other locations within the software. And then finally, there's this notes button. And this is one place I'd really like to see the software kind of expand in the future. Right now, it's, again, a single text box where you can type something in. And you can just kind of fill the information out. It would be super nice if we could have multiple notes that would be saved, where you could have groups of those. And you'll see how, when I reference to scenes, how that could look and how cool that might be. Then down here we have on this architecture, we have these narrative strands, which, again, in any D&D campaign, you might have multiple things or story elements happening. In this case, I have two kind of set up, the breaking of the ordning, and then Magera, the fire elemental, which in our campaign was successfully stolen by the Drow. And I do need to fill these out, but you can kind of have these build out and then connect them as the narrative elements grow. And this goes back to the notes. It'd be nice if in the notes tab here you could have multiple notes similar where you have multiple tabs kind of laid out and you could label those. Next tab we have the characters, and this is one place where I think it's really, really nice compared to some of the other systems. So what I've set up in my campaign is we have our player characters set up as main characters, and you can see up here. Right now they're all tagged with an exclamation point to do, because I haven't yet filled in the details that our players have set up. But what you can do then is when you click into a character, there's a breakdown of all the information about who this character is and might be. From that, I'll just click on personal data, and it gives you prompts for all sorts of questions for that character, which when you click edit, you can drop down through and answer those questions. That is super handy, especially if you're looking to work with your characters and build side stories or elements for them. And this is, even though it's not built for tabletop RPGs, the queue that they have set up here works really well to give you that element that you might need for some of your story building. And this is one of the main things that really kind of attracted me to this software. You can also add some images down here of your character, anything that your players have given you to reference, or if you look up something yourself. Very, very handy. The other thing here we have is secondary characters, and I'm going to be using this myself as mainly for the NPCs that are in the game. One big difference between the main characters and the secondary characters is that the main characters only have a single text box. They don't have all of those questions set up like they do for the main characters. And there's no real distinction in the software between the main characters and the secondary characters in that sense. So whatever system works well for you, if you want to flesh out your NPCs to a higher level, you can certainly do that. One cool thing that I have done, and here's an example of what an image might look like for storing that character information, is Bibisco doesn't have a good tagging system or subcategories in a lot of instances. So you can see here on my character screen, I put up kind of a preface name, player, name of the character. Here, NPC, spymaster, seer. And I've done that for various items and characters that have come up. I'm also going to be doing that with objects as well later. It just allows a little bit of more flexibility trying to subcategorize it, because there aren't a lot of subcategories in here. From there, we have the locations. These are the locations that you would show up in your campaign, and you can fill these out as much as you want. So I just tend to keep it kind of brief and bullet pointed. And then you can reference and link this into the other locations and chapters and scenes that show up in your story. And there's some cool analysis that I'll show you in the back tab here that makes it kind of cool and fun to see how that stuff comes into reference. But you can then see how I have the tabs set up as to what do I need to work on and what things have been completed. I'll also just show quickly what did not yet complete. So you might have something that's maybe partially worked on but is not completed, and it will show up with a yellow tab. Objects. So this is where I am referencing treasure or other sorts of information that my characters might pull into or reference inside the story, or something I might pull and either quote-unquote give to them or have them with some sort of information. The most obvious thing we want, of course, is your treasure. And you can fill out the details in here using, it's a standard text box, and you can kind of fill out the information. Here's an example of one I have filled out, Hiziger. It's a type of stone, a dwarven stone that has certain properties, and I've kind of bullet pointed that information out. And you can see I can put a couple of different categories. This will probably be expanded as I continue to work with this. So we have treasure, an object, a downtime activity, something that just kind of came up in my story building that I decided needed to be placed here as a reference point. Next up is relations. So this is actually a mind mapping piece of software. And what you can do is you can select a main character, a location, or object. I will just click one of my main characters here, add her in, and then add another piece. Let's just add a object. I'll add the pearls. And you can type in and connect these and type in the relation. I have not experimented with this yet. It is very rudimentary so far, but it is something that looks like it could be a lot of potential in the future. There's some other mind mapping software that I like to use that is more fleshed out. One I'm using is called Mind Maple, and I might make a video on that separately as well. But this is a really interesting concept that might be worth kind of exploring, especially as the software continues to develop and has that kind of built out. So here it is, chapters. This is where the meat of really most of what you'll be doing in it comes to play here. So how I'm setting this up is we working through chapters, and then I have scenes, which are basically the locations in a sense, or the various scenes that your characters might come across. So here, when you open a chapter opening, you have a reason why this chapter is being played, and you can put that any sort of information here. You can have additional notes. Here, because I'm using as a reference point an Adventures League adventure as a kickoff point, I put some background information in here on that. As I kind of have worked through the software more and more over the past few weeks, this kind of text block here for me is a little bit too much. You can see it's kind of a lot to read through. So I've been experimenting bullet pointing information out, which you'll see here in a moment. So let's take a look at some of the scenes and how I'm kind of putting the scenes together. So I'll pop into this first scene here. So what we have is a breakdown of essentially what is in this scene that my characters will be coming across. Again, because Bibisco's interface and text interface is kind of rudimentary at this point, there's some kind of workarounds or some notes that I've done for myself to kind of make stuff stand out. So let's go into the editor here really quick and just take a look at that interface. So what I've done is set a title in the text box itself in addition to this title here. And the reason why I've done that is because you can export a project from here using the export tool. It'll export your entire project, but it currently can't export on a chapter by chapter basis to like Word or something like that. But what it can do is inside here you can print each chapter or each section. So if I open this in preview, then I can print just this chapter that I've been working on. And you can see here, this is kind of like the breakdown that it gives me. And you can see I've had to add this title in here to give me that reference. And this is if I were to print it up and bring it to my session or use it as reference. But you can see how this breakdown here is kind of spaced things out with bullet points. And this is a system that's worked well for me. So I have a couple kind of vernacular or formatting issues or tools that I've used to help keep things in check for me. I typically don't write the entire session out like word for word narratively. I try to bullet point things out. So I have a scene introduction, which is bolded. I have a brief kind of introduction to the scene. This is typically something I would read out loud. I always like to underline locations or proper names in any sense in the scene for my own reference and cue. And then I will typically bold items or bullet points that are specifically going to be called out for me as the DM. These are specific notes to myself, maybe something I want to specifically reference or say out loud, or make sure I'm aware of that as a background piece of information that may come up. So after we have the scene introduction, we have a description of the location where the party's meeting, plus what the location is that they're going to be meeting in. You can see here in here I bolded a specific section because this is something if the characters have or some of them have already arrived at the inn or if others are arriving later, that's something I would want to call out to myself to reference during the description. Here is a quote. This is something specifically I would have a character quote. In this case, I didn't put the specific character's name, but I typed in quote bold, and then I italicize what that text is specifically for myself. Next up, I have questions that characters might ask the main character. And this is typical how she might respond, or based on their responses or reactions, how she might respond. And then finally, we have some additional quotes. Also, we have some history check information or other sort of checks that you might prompt for yourself or for your players. And I have those, again, bullet pointed out. I try to keep it as streamlined as possible. This is actually one of the longer outlines I have in the entire system. This is also at the bottom of this page then, entire list of possible questions. And then finally a kind of closing of the scene. And again, I'll pull up, this is what, if I pull this up in a print or PDF, this is how it would export. I feel this is actually pretty readable from a DM standpoint to use on the fly when you're referencing your stuff inside the game. Also, I'll pull up the Project Explorer, which I referenced to before, because again, you can pull up various context information. So if I wanted to pull up Seer, one of the characters, for example, I can just type her in, reference her, and her quick information will come up on the sidebar. Includes that image I had as well as that descriptive information I had on her character sheet back on the other page. And you can do this for almost any of the content that you have inside the system. So if I have the Red Sheaf Inn and Tavern, which is where the characters are staying, I can have that bullet point information very quickly available. So that's kind of the breakdown scenes, and this is, I felt, has been one of the best tools I've had so far for kind of tracking some of that stuff. Let's jump over. There's a search tool. You can search for just about anything inside your project. It gives you a breakdown of where those might pop up, how often they're popping up, and where they're referenced. And you can jump to those pretty quickly. As well as kind of reference character information. So this is kind of operating, at least for me right now, is how some of those relations tabs might. It would be really cool if the project does break some of that up a little bit more. Another great feature which I've really enjoyed is this timeline feature. So each scene that you have in your book, you can associate with a timeline. And you can create your own custom timeline and not have to use a real-world timeline. So I've have these all set up so far. Formatting's kind of a long one here. You can see all these scenes happened on one day. But this is actually a pretty useful feature if you need to reference back to anything in the past. And then finally, this analysis tab. This is another really, really cool feature that I found that I've liked in this. It gives you a breakdown of all of the content and text you've used inside Bibisco. So here we have a chapter length. Not really useful for tabletop planning per se. The big thing that's really nice is this character distribution. So this will show you how often these characters are showing up in the story and in which chapters they're showing up in down here. Now, I did start this off initially and have all my player characters tagged in all of the scenes and chapters, but I quickly found that they're going to be in pretty much 100% of the scenes and chapters in almost all cases. So that just kind of flooded this and imbalanced the distribution, made it a little bit not quite as usable. So I did remove them from that, but having the other NPCs reference gives a cool breakdown of how that, and I can see how that will continue to kind of build out. The other nice thing here is this kind of characters list of appearances, where you can have each character, especially the NPC, broken down into those lists. Again, you can see there's no information for my players here because I removed them. But presumably they're going to be in just about every scene and chapter. But this is something that's really going to be useful for NPCs, I think, as we continue to build forward. Then you can have a location distribution, how often certain locations are referenced. Narrative strands, as we begin to build that out, you can tag the various narrative strands. So it's a really, really cool, kind of useful tool. Finally, then, there's an export tool. You can export these as different formats in PDF, in Word. As I mentioned before, it basically exports your entire project, so it's not quite as flexible for D&D planning as a per scene. I have sent an email to the developer, which they did say they're going to kind of build out some of this chapter exporting, which will be something that will be really kind of useful in the future. One other thing I wanted to point out, which I forgot to earlier, is inside a specific scene, there's these tags in addition to the Project Explorer. And here is where you can start tagging all of the NPCs. If you're doing some sort of point-of-person view, you can, but you can set your calendar, you can set the objects that are in the scene, as well as the narrative strand that it belongs to. Again, very nice tool, I think, overall for helping keep track of D&D planning, and I hope some of you out there as well feel free to check this out. As I mentioned, it's actually free. If you go to Bibisco, Bibisco.com, check it out. It might be something that would be a nice fit for some of you.